Our fourth presentation today is Off the Air and in the Stacks, cataloging the WTJU collection. This presentation will be presented by Dan Ray, and Dan is the Music and Metadata Librarian at the University of Virginia, where he has worked since 2017. He received his MLIS from the University of Washington after a 15-year career as a music educator in Washington State. He currently plays trombone in the Washington, D.C. Army National Guard Band. When he's not cataloging music or tooting his horn, Dan can be found riding a bike along the back roads and trails of Central Virginia. So please welcome Dan.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start with a disclaimer. WTJU, the radio station, is not going off the air, just in case anybody was wondering. It's the University of Virginia's community radio station that has been on the air since 1957. And according to their website, they provide excellent music across genres from classical to jazz to folk to rock to hip hop, as well as community stories. In 2019, they offered us a portion of their CD collection that they were getting rid of as they were downsizing and changing locations to a smaller facility. And we ended up receiving over 60 boxes with varying numbers of CDs, but with no inventory. So we didn't know exactly what we had, but we did see that we had this valuable collection, a lot of classical, a lot of jazz, but also genres that we didn't have well represented in our collection, including some various global styles and folk music that just weren't as well represented. And so it broadened the scope of our collection, and we also know the fickle nature of streaming media services, that they can't always be reliable. And with this collection, we do have the physical resource of the containers and liner notes, which is really valuable, especially with the classical and jazz offerings. And so we decided it was something we wanted to add to our collection. But I am a one-man metadata operation for this, and was only given limited time within the scope of my duties to work on this collection. And so I worked with my metadata team and our developers. I wanted to find a way to automate at least part of the process. And about this time in 2020, UCLA presented on a batch processing that they had worked on for a CD collection, and I kind of stole some of their ideas and kind of worked it in with our own systems and came up with a workflow that would prioritize CDs with existing records in WorldCat as identified by UPC barcodes. The workflow would be broken down into 4 steps that could be done simultaneously or consecutively. You could do a bunch of boxes through step 1 and then do all those boxes through step 2, or you could do one box all the way through and then just do the next box. It allowed for flexibility, number 1, in personnel, so that there were certain steps that could be done by non-catalogers. I could have other library staff, I could have student library workers, I could even have volunteers working on some of these steps. It also provided flexibility in physical location, which was helpful because in my current job, I work in technical services, which is in the main library. This collection was being housed for processing in the music library on the other side of campus. And these were important because of, number 1, the planned event of our library being shut down for a major renovation and moving technical services off campus. But also in 2020, this other thing happened. And so with the onset of the pandemic, we lost our student workers, we lost our volunteers, and this actually became a one-person operation in my basement for a few months. But it allowed me to focus on all this and also streamline the process. What we ended up with is this workflow, and we have 4 main steps: the inventory, the WorldCat lookup, the copy cataloging, and the final processing, and then a decision matrix that we would go through at each step of this process. starting with the inventory in the top right of this decision matrix, we would go through one box at a time, and we would sort out any items that were damaged or missing. Those would be discarded. Anything that was out of scope, spoken word, anything like that that wasn't going into the music library collection, we were setting aside. And then the rest, we would take and we would sort out the ones with UPC code and those without. And those without were set aside for later processing. Those with would be added to a spreadsheet. For each box would get a spreadsheet simply listing the UPC code and the title. And it averaged about 120 disks per box. Then once we had that spreadsheet, we would do our automated process. The data on the spreadsheet would be run through a program. It was created in-house, and this was done one box at a time. The program, which was a bash script, which probably means something to somebody, it automatically identifies matches in WorldCat. It downloads those records. It checks for matches within our own holdings. And yeah, and that's basically it. The program, we gave the clever name Lookup. And any items without an existing record would be set aside for later processing. And any items matching our holdings were also set aside. In the copy cataloging phase, the records were batch edited to meet metadata standards and then uploaded to the catalog. Once uploaded, they were checked individually for quality control and assigned a call number. It was an accession number, and what we did was we gave these kind of an advanced block of accession numbers further than what we already had in the collection, so we kind of have this range of almost 10,000 numbers that we could use for this collection. And finally, the catalog disks and cable cases are labeled and prepared for a long, happy life in the stacks. We averaged adding about 70 disks per box, so a little over 50% through this process. And when I started, I had a music student library employees and a couple volunteers helping. Pandemic conditions then required all 4 steps to be completed by myself for a few months. But then as we started coming back, we started bringing some other library staff and volunteers to assist on the inventory and final processing phases. So in the lookup program, here's a little rundown of how that works. We start with the inventory spreadsheet we make with just the UPC and the title. We save that as a CSV file. That would be run through the bash script. The program would then return 2 results, a spreadsheet and a text file with all the records in one from that were retrieved into one text file. The spreadsheet included the UPC and the title, a local key for any local holdings, a lost indicator from our local holdings. If it was lost, I would use it, that column wasn't used very much, so I ended up using it for another purpose. The OCLC number, and then other local holdings data. That spreadsheet was sorted by local holdings data and OCLC numbers, so we kind of could see at a glance how many we had in our holdings, how many we would be adding, and then how many would be added later. And that was used during the copy cataloging process. So once we have that text file, open it up in Mark Text, or excuse me, in Mark Edit. And then we would make some changes that could be made to all the records. We would do some checking just to make sure the records were good. And the most frequent changes were just updating the 3XX fields. We didn't really do a lot. I didn't deal with the 3-4X fields because there's so much variation in there. It wasn't easy to do it to everything all at once. And our local policy is not to do that unless they are RDA records. Those were saved as binary mark files. Oh, and that's the picture of the bash script running. It's magic. I really don't know how to work in a text prompt environment, and I feel really I felt a sense of accomplishment every time I would hit enter and it would start running and doing this repeatedly for like 120 items and then stop magically, and then I would have these 2 files. It was awesome. And then we take that binary mark file and then we upload it to our local catalog. And then it appears like the journey to Donna Fugata you see here. Each box would then be given a corresponding digital file that had 5 files. It would include the spreadsheet for the inventory, the lookup results text file, the mark text file, the binary mark file, and the lookup results spreadsheet. And so those were used during the copy cataloging process, but also possibly in the future as we look at these ones without records, we would already have an inventory ready to go. So looking back at this, our workflow mainly follows the blue decision tree, which, as you can see, leaves a lot. It's a significant number in that if it didn't have a UPC code, it was saved for later processing, and if it didn't have a match, it was saved for later processing, and so. And some of those would have matches in WorldCat because a lot of times the UPC isn't included in an 024. And so we'll have some matches that require other searches to find. And then we have the ones that don't have a record and will need original cataloging. And so where are we now? We currently have, we had 66 numbered boxes. And I finished box 66 last month. And I turned around on the shelves, and there was a box, and it said Box X. And I was like, I turn off the lights and leave the library, and I come back in the morning, CDs, I don't know. So yeah, the collection doesn't quite end yet, but we inventoried over 8,000 items, and we have, as of now, we have added 4,562 CDs to the collection. And right now, this process is kind of at a pausing point, and but we have the potential, looking towards the future. If we want to do this in small batches, one at a time, or a few at a time, I or one of the other catalogers, as training is available, can do this doing manual searches and original cataloging if necessary. We are interested, though, in maybe automating some of this, maybe automating name title searches to look at some of these ones that didn't find matches the first time or don't have UPC codes. If anybody wants to have a conversation at some time this week, I'd love to sit down and chat. And that's basically where we are. As I mentioned, I did the last numbered box, box 66, which is from their reggae collection. And it was interesting because the first box I did was also from the reggae collection, and as the program was pulling up results, it was pulling up matches from the first batch that I did, and so I'm like, hey, it works. And so that was pretty satisfying. And as you can see here, we are now the proud repository of Christmas in the Stars, the Star Wars Christmas album from 1980. This is not available on Spotify or Apple Music. On the Amazon Marketplace, it's currently going for about $60. And it includes Anthony Daniels singing those classics, The Odds Against Christmas, and What Can You Get a Wookiee for Christmas When He Already Owns a Comb? So yeah, we now are the proud repository of Christmas in the Stars. That's all I have. Thank you very much. And are there any questions?
Yes, are you marking these in any way as being part of this WTJU collection? Is that something that your users might find valuable, or?
Yes. So I added a 590 note, and as well as in our bibliographic notes, there is also an indicator that it's a gift from the WTJU.
So you mentioned you brought records up to metadata standards in just a little brief thing. Could you be a little more specific about what kinds of things you considered necessary in order to make them pass muster? I have some ideas, but I'm listening to what you say.
Sure. So if they're not RDA or specified RDA compliant, I did not upgrade them to that. Mm-hmm. Basically, is a very, very low standard. Like, so if they had the 336, 337, 338, and if they had a listing of tracks. Those are kind of the two main things I was looking for. 505, listing the individual tracks. Those are the main things I was looking for.
Were you worried about things like whether they had 007 fields in them and that kind of thing?
Yes, I was checking the 007s as well. I was making sure that there was consistency there.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have a question on CVent from Michelle Cronquist, and she asks, I wonder if you ever get false hits, like when ISBNs are reused for different books.
Yes, that has happened. US UPC codes, yeah, have had happen. And so that's why I go through them individually, because it has happened where it was the UPC code, it downloaded the wrong record. And so at that point, in some cases, I would manually search or I would create a new record while going through them individually.
Large pillar in the way.
Okay.
Hi, thanks. I have, I think, what's a closely related question. What about the records where they pulled up more than one OCLC record from that UPC? I'm guessing there were more than a few in that category. So
the programmers went through that process and they prioritized. So they made sure that they got rid of anything that was online because that was one of the things, and they prioritize the one with the most holdings.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, I think that's our time.
Thank you very much.